My name is Thomas Reeves. I have been a truck driver for over 15 years, traversing the roads of the United States from coast to coast. What I am about to recount happened in October 2019 on a particularly cold night on a secondary road in the state of Montana near the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. It was around 11:40 p.m. when I decided to take a shortcut via Route 89, a less traveled road that cuts through a mountainous area. The sky was exceptionally dark that night with no moon and dense clouds blocking any natural light. My GPS indicated that I still had about 4 hours of travel until my destination in Great Falls. The road was completely deserted, which was not unusual for that time and region. My headlights were the only source of light within a radius of miles, and the radio began to experience interference, alternating between static and distorted fragments of country songs. At first, I didn't think much of it. Radio interference is common in remote areas. That's when I noticed something strange in the rearview mirror. A faint, greenish light seemed to hover a few feet above the asphalt, following my truck. At first, I thought it was a reflection from another vehicle, but that was impossible. There was no one else on the road besides me. The light began to approach, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The air inside the cabin suddenly became colder, so much so that I could see my own breath. The dashboard of the truck started to flicker inexplicably, and the engine, which had always been reliable, began to sputter. I tried to remain calm, but my heart was racing faster and faster. The greenish light was now practically beside the truck, and for the first time, I saw something that left me in shock. Through the passenger window, I saw a translucent humanoid figure with features that seemed to belong to an ancient Native American. Its expression was one of deep sadness, and its eyes seemed to hold all the pain of the world. At that moment, my truck simply stopped. It wasn't a gradual halt. The engine died instantly, as if all power had been sucked away. I sat there stranded in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by absolute darkness and that supernatural presence. The being began to manifest more clearly. Now I could see details of its traditional garments, adornments, and body paint that glowed with that same greenish light. It didn't move like a normal human. It seemed to float, and its form wavered like smoke in the wind. I tried to turn on the CB radio to call for help, but I could only hear an ancient, distant voice speaking in a language I didn't understand. The air grew colder, and I began to feel an inexplicable pressure in my chest, as if something were trying to communicate something important to me. The entity began to manifest more intensely. Through the frost-covered glass, I saw that other figures were beginning to emerge around the truck. They were silhouettes similar to the first, all with that same greenish glow forming a circle around my vehicle. My mind was trying to rationalize what was happening, but there was no logical explanation. The digital clock on the dashboard flickered repeatedly, showing 0, regardless of the actual time. The air inside the cabin was so frigid that small ice crystals began to form at the edges of the windshield. It was then that I began to hear it. They weren't normal voices, but rather an ancestral chant that seemed to come from all directions. It was a sad, ancient melody that, even without understanding the words, conveyed a deep sense of loss and lament. My whole body trembled, and it wasn't just from the cold. The main figure, the one I had seen first, moved closer to the passenger window. Its spectral hand passed through the glass as if it didn't exist. And at that moment, a series of visions flooded my mind. I saw images of a pristine land, untouched by modern civilization, people living in harmony with nature, and then I saw the destruction. I saw conflicts, diseases, death, and despair. I understood that I was witnessing the history of that people, their memories, their pain. The place where I had stopped was not just a stretch of road. It was an ancient sacred territory of the Blackfeet, a place where traumatic events had occurred over 2 centuries ago. The visions continued, becoming more intense. I saw ancient ceremonies taking place exactly where my truck was parked, warriors defending their lands, families being decimated by diseases brought by settlers. Each image was like a stab of guilt and sorrow in my chest. The singing grew louder, and the figures began to perform what seemed to be an ancient ritual dance. Their movements were fluid, almost hypnotic, and the greenish light they emitted created complex patterns in the night air. The ground beneath the truck began to vibrate slightly. I tried to reach for my cell phone to record what was happening, but the device was completely dead, just like all the electronic systems in the truck. It was as if all modern technology was incompatible with that ancestral manifestation. The temperature continued to drop, and I could feel that something even more significant was about to happen. The spectral figures were now moving in perfect synchrony, and the air seemed to carry an ancient and powerful energy that made my hair stand on end. Suddenly, all the figures stopped their movements simultaneously. The silence that followed was deafening, more disturbing than any sound I had ever heard. The main figure, which still held eye contact with me, began to emit a brighter glow, and then something extraordinary happened. The scenery around me began to change. It was as if time was reversing before my eyes. The paved road disappeared, giving way to a dirt trail. The trees around seemed younger, more alive, and the sky was different, free from the light pollution we know today. I saw a Blackfeet camp materializing around the truck. Traditional teepees appeared out of nowhere. Children ran and played. Elders sat in a circle around a campfire. It was like being in a historical movie, except everything felt terribly real. I could smell the smoke, hear the voices, feel the life pulsing in that community. But then the scene changed drastically. The sky darkened, and I began to witness the moment when that sacred place was violated. I saw soldiers arriving, I saw conflicts, I saw diseases spreading. The images were so vivid that they made me feel physically ill. Tears streamed down my face as I witnessed that historical tragedy. The main entity was now inside the cab with me. There was no longer a physical barrier between us. Its face was inches from mine, and its eyes, those eyes held centuries of history and suffering. I felt a deep connection, as if I was receiving not just memories, but also emotions and ancestral knowledge. It was then that I understood the purpose of that encounter. They were not there to scare me or harm me. They were there to share their story, to ensure that their memory would not be forgotten. They wanted someone from the modern era to witness what had happened in that sacred place. The spirit began to speak to me in English, its voice sounding like thousands of overlapping whispers. You have been chosen to be a witness. Carry our story. Tell others. This place is sacred. Do not let it be forgotten. Slowly, the visions began to dissipate. The spectral figures faded away one by one, leaving only the main entity. It made one last gesture, touched my forehead with its ethereal fingers. At that moment, I felt a surge of energy pass through my body, and all the memories of what I had witnessed solidified in my mind with crystalline clarity. When the entity finally withdrew, the entire electrical system of the truck came back to life instantly. The engine started on its own, the radio began to work again, and my phone showed 3:33 a.m. Almost 4 hours had passed, although to me it felt like only a few minutes had gone by. Trembling and still trying to process everything that had happened, I drove to the nearest town, Browning, which was about 12 miles away. Throughout the journey, I kept my eyes fixed on the road, fearing to look in the rearview mirror and see those figures again. The rest of the trip was a blur of conflicting thoughts and emotions. When I arrived in Browning, I stopped at the first gas station I found open. The attendant, an elderly Blackfeet man, looked at me strangely as if he knew exactly what I had just experienced. As I tried to compose myself with a hot coffee, he approached and said quietly, "You saw them, didn't you? The Guardians of the Valley?" Surprised by his question, I just nodded. The man, who introduced himself as John Running Bear, told me that that stretch of Route 89 was known among his people as the Spirit Way. According to him, only chosen people could see the Guardians, and this happened when the spirits felt they needed to share their story. John explained to me that the place where I stopped was an ancient sacred cemetery where hundreds of his ancestors were buried during a smallpox epidemic in the 19th century. The government never officially recognized the site as sacred land, and the road was built over it in the 1950s, ignoring the protests of the indigenous community. In the days that followed, I began to notice changes in myself. I started having vivid dreams with the people I had seen in the visions. I began to understand words in Blackfeet without ever having studied the language. Even stranger, I developed an inexplicable sensitivity to historical places. I could feel the energy and memories embedded in certain locations. 3 months after the incident, I received an anonymous letter in my mailbox. Inside was an old tribal necklace and a piece of paper with geographic coordinates. When I researched, I discovered that the coordinates pointed to other sacred sites of the Blackfeet, some of them not officially documented. Today, 5 years after that supernatural night, my life has changed completely. I have stopped being just a truck driver and have become an active advocate for Indigenous rights. I use my experience to raise awareness about the importance of preserving and respecting Native American sacred sites. I have returned several times to that stretch of Route 89, always at night. Although I have never witnessed such an intense manifestation as the first time, I still feel a different energy there. Sometimes I see distant greenish lights or hear fragments of that ancestral chant in the wind. The most astonishing thing is that I am not alone in this experience. After sharing my story in closed trucker groups, I received dozens of similar accounts from other drivers who passed through that region. Some described the same spirits, others reported different yet equally significant experiences. In 2022, I managed to organize a movement that led to an archaeological study in the area. The findings confirmed the presence of an ancient indigenous cemetery at the site. There is currently a process underway to officially recognize the site as sacred territory of the Blackfeet and possibly reroute that stretch of road. John Running Bear, the gas station attendant, has become a great friend and mentor. He taught me a lot about Blackfeet culture and helped me better understand the meaning of that supernatural encounter. According to him, spirits carefully choose their witnesses, and being chosen carries a great responsibility. I still drive my truck, but now I choose routes that pass through indigenous lands and historical sites. I keep a detailed journal of all the sensations and experiences I have in these places. The necklace I mysteriously received never leaves my neck, and sometimes when I touch it, I receive flashes of memories that are not mine, glimpses of a life and a culture that existed long before our modern times. The experience completely changed my perspective on life, death, and our connection to the past. I learned that there are truths and realities beyond our modern understanding, and that the spirits of those who came before us still have much to teach us. For those traveling along Route 89 in Montana, especially at night, pay attention. If you see greenish lights or feel an inexplicable chill, know that you may have been chosen as I was. And if you are, remember, they are not there to scare, but to share and preserve a story that cannot be forgotten.